Hello everyone, I wanted to put together a small supplemental video regarding your homework for CSC300 part 1 and 2. The first question in the homework is finding the min value, and essentially that is what we did with the max value, but the inverse of it. So that one should be straight enough, forward enough. You only really need a for loop to do that one. And as a general reminder, especially in part 2, you're only going to want to be using one for loop for your homework. If you are using nested for loops or anything like that, we want to avoid that mindset because yesterday during class we saw how ineffective nested loops were. We want to make sure that we're coding efficiently. So for this homework, even if you're getting the correct answer using one for loop, or excuse me, two or more for loops, make sure that you only try to use one. And if you see up here, I'll be grading it off of what is stated there. So in homework part 2, I'll show it later, but it does state that you can only use at most one for loop. So make sure that you notice that. The second one here, I added a bit of code here that is just to print out the items of a list for reasons I'll show later. But this is the min position. So what I would recommend is copy your code to find the min value. And once you find the min value, you technically also know the position if you're using a for loop. Hint, it's look at the indexes. And then you can go ahead and try to return that value there. And then you see here, this one might seem a bit complicated at once, but we can break it down into these bite-sized chunks, right? You already know how to get the position and the index, or excuse me, the position and the value of the minimum in a double list. Now all you need to do is try to say, okay, well, how do I find the max? Well, we already know how to find the max in a list. We did that yesterday. So all you need to figure out is how do you find a max position in a list? And you already know how to find a min position. So just refactor your code a little bit for the max. And then go ahead and just subtract those values. And then again, you might need to use, there is one function that you can use. I think he stated it in the directions up here. Yep, right here. You can use the math.abs function to compute the absolute value in your code. And the reason we do that here is that you want to make sure that whatever value you're getting back in your position is positive. So if you might get negative numbers, so for this one, you could return using the math.abs function. And the way that we could do that here is if I type out math abs, and then if I say something like -5 here, even though that says or excuse me, if I go 3 minus 5 here, even though that will give me a -2, it will give me the absolute value, so it will be positive there. Great. So again, if I run this here, I'll get the failed test. And what I wanted to show, because he kind of didn't get to this yesterday, you have two main methods here. The first one is just your normal main. And the second one, the main that we run, we get all the text outputted. The second one that we run is called main1, but if you delete this, and then of course you can't have two main functions, so I'm going to put this back to be main2 or 1. This could be anything you want, really, as long as you just don't have it named main. But I'll just leave it as main1, so it's easier to just delete that. And then up here, you're going to see this trace draw steps of method. Now, I actually changed this, but when you look at this piece of code, you're actually going to see it looks something like this here. And what's cool about this is that you say, okay, hey, I want to draw the steps of the method of min value. We're going to run this trace, and then we're actually going to test it out. So if you hit play when you do this, you really only get one failed test, right? Because that's what our testing functions already do. But the other thing that you'll output, if you go to your desktop, you'll see a graph.viz output. If we open this up, and I get a folder in here, I actually get to see this pretty neat looking structure. So this looks a bit complicated at the first point, but if we actually put our items here side by side, we see here we get a min value at number 55, and that actually references our line code. So this is where we get the return value from. And then we can see here that we're testing the min value, and it's giving us the list of 11, 21, 31, 9, and 41, which is telling us what's inside of that list. And we also get an expected, so essentially what we expect to come from this value. You also get to see with the pointers here that we have a list that we're going to be working with. And again, some of this, like the main idea here is that once you build out your code, you're going to be able to see a bit more images. So to actually showcase that, I created a small for loop, as you saw earlier, in min position. And I wanted to show off how you can actually change how to see different outputs. So if you go into your code in the main with the testing, the first thing you need to change is which method you're going to draw the steps of. So instead of min value, the method I want to draw the steps of is min position. So I'll say min position. And then the other thing that I need to change is I need to actually say test min position. And now every homework assignment is built out the same way like this. So the only thing that will change are the names, essentially. But you can just look at the function names up here and then change them down here. Now, if I go ahead and hit play here, again, I should get a fail method. I get a few items printed out because I am printing them out inside of my item here. But if we look at our desktop one more time, we'll then see that I get another folder, homework 1, there. And now, because I actually incremented stuff, we actually get a graph viz output, which is really neat. We could see here that from position, we start at line 75 in our code up here. And then we have the list that's expected. And depending on what you have going on in your code, you could see here that I actually have an I is equal to 0. And we could see just because I'm printing, not much more is going on. But essentially, once you are manipulating values, maybe I could do one more test here. I can make an int current position is equal to 0. And instead of printing out anything, I'm just going to set this to I. Let me see if I can rerun this then. Now we see I have a new folder. And if I open this guy up, you will see again the normal items there. And then as I go through it, you can now see that my current position is equal to 0. My I is equal to 0. And you can see why does this current position gets put in first before the I? Well, it's because I declared it first up here. And then my I is equal to 0. And then when my I increments at line 77, my current position will increment as well. So again, you can kind of see here that we're able to get these items incremented. You might be thinking, okay, well, my code tells me to increment at line 76. This is my plus pluses. But it's essentially after you get through that line, after you're done with line 76, you are down to here, and you need to run that piece of code. So all that happens is your I is incremented. And then, of course, after we are done with line 77, we go back up to line 76 because we return to the start of our for loop. And then you can see our values changing. So again, this is a very rudimentary function. Like this isn't what you would use GraphViz for. But if you're printing out your stuff, or if you're very confused, like, okay, what is actually happening with my items here? This is a really nice way of showing it off. And you can see at the end here, my current position ends at 4. And I return 0, of course. But this is essentially what GraphViz would do. Excellent. So that's a bit about homework 1 that I wanted to show off. And again, if you want to test yourself again, you can delete the 1 from there, put the 1 back up here and hit play again. We have our failed values again, which is a good start. And then if we actually go into my first homework for 300 part 2, the main thing I wanted to show off is all of these tell us that we need to use at most 1 loop. And some of us might be a bit confused here because we're saying, okay, well, how do I compare 2 values at once without using a nested loop? Like some of us are using J and I. What I want to show off again as a quick example is that let's just say I have a list of items here. And what I can actually do here using a for loop, I'll show both ways, a for loop and a while loop, is I'm going to build out a for loop like normal. I want to set an incrementer value to, my index to 0. I want to make sure that my I does not go over the length of my list, my items.length. I'm going to plus my I, so I increment by 1 each time. And then, of course, what we've always seen so far is we say something like, okay, I'm going to print out, let me print out my item of I, items of I, excuse me. And of course, this would work normally. If I just run this code right here, we'll see we all get it there. I might just add a little space after this so that it looks a bit neater. There we go. So normal, nothing that we haven't seen before. And of course, what you might have seen before as well, though, is that we can actually manipulate our index in place here. So what I want to do actually is if I go ahead and go down 1, and I could say something like, hey, can you get me the I plus 1 of it? This will actually work for us. So if I hit play here, you see I get item 1, item 2. And let me actually, before I run this one more time, Let me print a line here so we could see where this two items end. So it looks a bit neater. Great. So now you can see I get item 1 and item 2. Then we get item 2 and item 3. Now you might be wondering, okay, well, how do I use this for my homework? Well, in your homework, especially with the num unique, you are checking if there's items in the list that aren't, that are unique. So what essentially you could do, and one more thing that we can notice from this too, is that, let's just say it there. For some examples here, you'll notice that these arrays look like they're going to be sorted for us. Some of these, let's look at the test here. Yep, for our num unique, our arrays are going to be sorted. So essentially what you can assume is you can go ahead and try to look forward, and you don't need to worry about maybe something not being there, you don't need to account for these scenarios where it might be unsorted. So because it's sorted, it's going to be a bit easier to work with. But having this idea of incrementing through your array using these indexes is a bit more efficient. And we can actually do this with +2, of course. As you can see here, I go from item 1 to item 3 and so forth. We will just use +1 for my example here, but you'll notice I'm getting an exception. And it's telling us that index 5 out of bounds for length 5. And again, this goes back to the example we saw during our class, right? If we have an array of 5 elements, the amount of indexes that we have access to is from 0 to 4. So right now, my I+1 is actually saying, hey, get me items of value 5, or get me items at index 5, and our index is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have a 5th one, so it's giving us the exception. So how do I fix this? Well, essentially what you would need to do is say, hey, I need to keep going until I'm 1 less than my length. That means that my index value, instead of going up to 4, because again, as just a reminder, this is going from 0 to 5. If I can make this 5 into a 4, that will tell me to go from 0 to 4. Because remember, the length of the items is 5, and if we subtract 1 from the length of the items, 5 minus 1, that gives us 4. And then, of course, if we go ahead and run this piece of code, then we can see neatly that I get item 1, item 2, item 2, item 3, and so forth. So again, this is one way that you can approach these solutions using a single for loop. And again, you are required to use a single loop in this. And now you might be wondering, okay, how do I use this with a while loop? If you prefer while loops, well, it's the same type of concept here. While index is less than items dot length, I can actually, one sec, let me grab these very quickly. I could say while I is less than items dot length, I'm going to do my printing out. And then, of course, if I go ahead and try to run this, oopsie daisy, I did that on purpose. I will need to increment my index normally, as we saw yesterday, because it's a while loop. We're getting the same issue again. We're getting that exception. So all I would need to do inside of my while loop here is do my subtraction. We get the same output. So again, it doesn't matter which one to use, a for loop or a while loop. They'll both achieve the same effect. But I hope this helps out with how you can use, for homework part 2, a single for loop or while loop to achieve these goals. So again, manipulate your indexes. And you don't need to worry right now about it not being sorted. We'll get into more complicated versions of this later. But essentially, this is a great way for you to go ahead and manipulate your indexes to see the amount of unique values and stuff for your part 2. If you have any questions, please let me know via email or the office hours that we'll have tomorrow from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Thank you, everyone.